Hi everyone, this is Jon Ludvig Hammer, and today I'm going to show my game against Christos Banikas, a Greek grandmaster, and this game is from the European Team Championship in Reykjavik. If you've watched all my videos on the bishop pair, you will be very familiar with the opening that was played. Once again, it was a Rogozin opening, and a line which is very popular for white at the moment, playing bishop g5 and surrendering the bishop pair, hoping to get a development initiative. So far, the game has progressed exactly the same way as my previous game against Sebastian Bogner. Bogner, he played a3, which is a different plan, hoping to get a strong initiative with the queen in a central position after bishop a5, queen takes d4. Banikas chose a different line. He went knight takes d4. The idea is that white tries to trap the bishop on b4. If he is successful, he will remove the black trump, the bishop pair, while still retaining his development initiative. With his last move, white is taking away the escape square on a5 for the black bishop. So now a3 is a big threat. Black has two choices. He can allow white to get the bishop, claiming that it has taken white so much time that the short-term initiative has evaporated in the meanwhile. Alternately, he can stick to his guns, going into complicated tactics including a pawn sacrifice just for the purpose of keeping the bishop. I was well prepared for the tactics, so I went with the pawn sacrifice, knight to a5. Black is simply exchanging off the knights, making sure that the bishop regains its escape square on a5. However, this does allow rook c7, white getting the rook in a very aggressive position, and if black were to try to exchange off this rook with rook c8, then there's a very nice tactic. Rook takes d7, takes back, check on f6, and suddenly there's a discovered check on h7, threatening both the king and the queen, with white getting a decisive material advantage. In order to prevent this trick, I went with my rook to d8, protecting the bishop. There are two ways for white to accept the pawn sacrifice. Firstly, he can just take on a5, takes back, and grab the pawn on b7. However, after queen f8, getting the queen away from this pin, there's a real danger that the rook on b7 is going to be trapped. On his next move, black will play bishop b6, and there's no easy way out for the white rook. If he tries to escape immediately with rook b3, there's a nasty pin, bishop a4. Instead, Banikas went for a3, trying to push the bishop away. Now, I need the a5 square for my bishop, so first I exchange off the knights and then have the square available. Once again, the rook can take on b7, but now black has some nice tactics, starting with bishop a4, creating an attack towards the rook and the queen at the same time. There's a queen exchange, after which the black rook is doing a very good job on the open file. After knight c5, bishop b6, we get another exchange. But essentially what happens is that the active black rook, with its partner coming soon, provides black with full compensation for the extra pawn white has on b2. Even so, that was the best option for white. In the game, my opponent played the rook back to c1, and that's just way too passive. When white gave away the bishop pair, it was because he would get a development advantage. With this retreat, white gives away anything reminiscent of an initiative, and instead it's black's turn to run the show. In this next phase of the game, my main priority is to make sure that white cannot exchange off the light-squared bishops. I want to keep both my bishops, the force that is the bishop pair. Of course, the main line I had to calculate is what happens if white tries to exchange off the bishops. My assessment was that after bishop a4, we go into an endgame in which black has very good chances thanks to his active rooks. This pawn on a3 will get into some serious trouble the next couple of moves. Here, I chose to regroup my bishop. Rather than on a5 where it's now, it would much rather be on f6 pointing down towards the white queenside pawns. Once again, it's important to know what to do if bishop e4, trying to exchange off the bishops. In this case, I was planning taking and going queen a4 and queen b3. This queen is putting some good pressure on the white queenside pawns, cooperating with the bishop coming on the long diagonal. So far, so good. Black has kept the bishops, but it's still a symmetrical position. How do you make progress? I tried a very standard and I think very good plan. Grabbing space. This pawn advance seems pretty innocent. But spoiler alert, this pawn actually ends up deciding the game. After some thought, I decided to go for an endgame. Black is definitely better, but it's by no means over. It's just more pleasant to play black. It's easier. You know where to put your pieces. Like always, white would love to exchange the light-squared bishops. Here, he had the opportunity with bishop a4. This could have resulted in the most amazing computer line, even in symmetrical and seemingly boring positions. We have a classic scenario of the bishop versus the knight. One of the advantages of the bishop is that you often choose when to exchange. Here, black goes into a pawn ending, but he gets the advantage of splitting up the white pawns. White got rid of his weakness, the c3 pawn, so seemingly, if anybody is better, it's white, threatening to go after the pawn on a7, creating a passed pawn of his own on the a file. However, the computer sees deeper, and it understands that black has the chance of getting a passed pawn by force on the other side. It's a race. Who's going to win? White ends up getting the queen first, but black ends up with the pawn extra. It's amazing what computers can come up with. This is best play by both players, and it seems to end up with black having an extra pawn in a queen ending. Of course, I didn't calculate this entire variation during the game. It's simply too complicated for humans. But it's really fascinating to see the lines the computer can generate and how amazing chess can be, even the options you didn't see during the game. These days, we have endgame databases, which have the answer to whether these positions with few pieces left are a draw or a win for one of the players. In this particular case, it's a draw regardless of white losing his h-pawn or not, but in a practical game, it can be really difficult to defend just like a computer. Back to the game, my opponent chose king f1 instead. Both players are just improving their positions, getting the kings in for the endgame, and getting my bishop on the long diagonal, threatening towards the white queen side. Black is definitely better, but he needs to open up the position to exploit the strengths of his bishops. My idea was to go g4, trying to open up the diagonal for my c6 bishop. In turn, white tries to block off this diagonal even more. Initially, the computer recommends this move. However, closer analysis reveals that this is actually losing by force. Once again, we see a scenario in which white manages to exchange off the light-squared bishops. However, I have made sure that every time this scenario occurs, it's at a cost for white. The bishop pair has done its job. Now it's time for the lone bishop to show its superiority against a knight. My opponent tried sacrificing a pawn with knight takes e4. It may seem a bit strange, but the thing was that if he took with the pawn, there's real trouble coming with the black king. Suddenly, it has a clear route to get pressure against the g2 pawn. Computer analysis confirms that this is a winning position for black, although its method of winning is very unorthodox. After king e3, preventing the black king from entering on the dark squares, black plays a5. A very strange move, but black wins by force, going into a pawn ending in which the black pawns win the race. King takes c3 is impossible after king e5, the king going back, and now it has let black go for this weak pawn on g2. Instead, he'll have to take back with the pawn. When b6 is a great move in this fantastic pawn ending. The point is that after king d4, b5, it's a position of mutual zugzwang. That means whoever is to move has to worsen his position. That's why black chose to go first one step and then another step to get this position with white to move instead of black to move. After white retreating, black comes up. And this time, it's the weakness of the a3 pawn that seals white's fate. So with his pawn sacrifice, knight takes e1, he's hoping that the centrally placed knight can create enough counterplay to make a draw. The knight is a good offensive piece as well as defensive, threatening the pawn on g5, but also keeping a look at the entry square on g3, where black really wants to get his king in order to capture the g2 pawn. Seemingly, white has some kind of a fortress on the king side and an active king, but it all turns out to be an illusion. The king is on the hunt, going after the black pawn on a7. However, through tactics and demonstrating the power of the long-range piece, the bishop, black manages to avoid this threat. Now, if the king takes the pawn, there's a discovered check b5, so that's off the table. To capture this a7 pawn, he needs to bring his knight, but it comes at a cost. Black is going to lose his two queenside pawns, but now we see how effective the long-range bishop is. It has been doing a great job defending both flanks simultaneously, whereas the white knight had to maneuver out of its defensive position to go on offense on the queen side. The time it takes for the knight to go on offense has enabled black to use his king to infiltrate through on the king side. White is just way behind in the race. Here, bishop d2 is a good move, making sure to eliminate the white pawn as soon as possible. After a5, white does win a piece, but there's nothing he can do against the advance of the h4 pawn. Black is trying to use his knight to attack the black pawns, eliminating every single one of them. But once again, black just leaves the bishop hanging, knowing that his h-pawn will decide the game. In the end, it turns out black is the one to get the piece up after h3. My calculations showed that I could get the knight and keep my last pawn at the same time. And now for the last accurate move. After bishop b8, white resigned. Notice that after bishop d6 instead, that would be a horrendous mistake, as after a5, the king doesn't really get back in time. a6 threatens promotion, the bishop has to go back, and now, through a pawn sacrifice, white gets a hold of the last black pawn, and the game would have ended in a draw. Of course, I saw this detail, and with bishop b8, my opponent resigned.